Accusations of war crimes committed in Ukraine have been piling up against Russia. Just this week, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris formally accused Russia of carrying out crimes against humanity to justify its escalation of the war. But during a war, how are these crimes verified and what can be done to get justice? Our next guest is a lawyer specializing in defending victims of dictatorial regimes, and he's the author of To Catch a Dictator. Reed Brody, thank you so much for being with us today on France 24. We heard a lot about the terrible acts committed in Bucha earlier in the war, but what else has Russia been accused of that could qualify as war crimes?
Well, practically everything that Russia has done, to be frank. I mean, we've seen the bombing of hospitals and schools. I mean, the first rule in war, in the laws of war, is to make a distinction between military objects and civilian objects. And we've seen time and time again Russian forces ignore that distinction, whether it's the hospitals and schools, whether it's attacking civilian infrastructure. We've seen the bombing of the theater in Mariupol, torture, sexual violence, the deportation of apparently thousands of children. All of these are presumably war crimes, and to the extent that they are being conducted massive and systematically, they are crimes against humanity, as Kamala Harris rightly said.
Now, many of the Russian soldiers that are being sent to the front lines of this war, they're young, they're inexperienced, and not long ago they were just living regular lives. So what conditions make these men capable of committing these types of crimes?
Well, I think, we've seen from the investigations, for instance, in Bucha carried out by the investigation carried out by the New York Times, that the commanders these were the orders. I mean, in war, people do things when they are, especially when they are young, especially when they're not trained, especially when they're not inculcated with the idea that you can refuse unlawful orders. But I would not put this on. I would not put this on the frontline soldiers, although many of them have apparently committed war crimes. What is really serious here is the instructions they were given, is the systematic policies. I mean, in the investigation of Bucha, we saw that the commander of Russian forces in Bucha, in Unit 234, for instance, he was there while these crimes were being committed. And then afterwards, even as the horrors of Bucha became known in the world, he was given a promotion by the head of the air forces. And Vladimir, and you can, right now we've seen a few Russian soldiers be tried in Ukraine, but obviously Ukraine and the International Criminal Court are looking to go much higher. And even without proof that Vladimir Putin, for instance, directly ordered the bombing of civilian targets or torture or murder, the fact that he has never intervened to stop those atrocities or to punish his officers who participated in them would make him liable under the well-established principle of command responsibility. I mean, Bucha was a year ago. The Russians have never investigated. They've never held anybody to account. And their response has tended to be that this is all false. What you do if you're a responsible superior is you say, this is unacceptable, you will be punished.
But with the justice system set up the way it is today, realistically, could Vladimir Putin ever be tried for these crimes? Or what type of proof would be necessary for something like that to happen?
Well, of course, it's one thing to show that, Vladimir Putin either gave an order or understood that his troops were committing atrocities, and therefore he could be responsible legally as a superior. It's quite another thing, actually, to put the handcuffs on him. I mean, as long as Vladimir Putin is entrenched in the Kremlin, as long as there's not a serious regime change in Russia, he's not going to be arrested. But these are also crimes without statute of limitations, and they will hang over his head forever. And I would expect that with the evidence that is being developed, I mean, there's never in history been as massive a judicial and justice response to atrocities. I mean, not only do we have the Ukrainian prosecutor, not only do we have the ICC, not only do we have the joint investigative team we heard from this morning, which brings together 6 countries, not only do we have dozens of other countries sending experts and cyber activists and researchers and journalists all over the world analyzing crimes in real time. So I would assume that this evidence is going to lead up to the top. The question, as you asked, is what is going to happen? Until Vladimir Putin, unless there's a change in regime, it's going to be hard, obviously, to put the handcuffs on Vladimir Putin.
War Crimes Prosecutor Reed Brody, thank you so much for joining the program and sharing your expertise with us today.
You're quite welcome.